So, today's event is hosted by Humanists of Houston. It's also co-promoted by Houston Atheists and Houston Skeptic Society. We have a very special guest, the world-famous atheist activist, video blogger, and Texas State Director of American Atheists, AronRa. AronRa first became known for his YouTube video series, The Foundational Falsehoods of Creationism, which exposed the fraudulent claims of the creationism movement, and which attracted over 9 million views and 73,000 subscribers to his YouTube channel. Since then, AronRa has achieved further prominence as a speaker at numerous atheist free thought conventions, including the World Atheist Convention, Reason on the Rock, the American Atheists National Convention, and the Texas Free Thought Convention. Aron has also had numerous appearances as a guest and co-host on podcasts and shows such as The Atheist Experience, The Nonprofits, The Thinking Atheist, and The Magic Sandwich Show. Most recently, AronRa has joined the Free Thought Blogs Network as a featured blogger with his blog Ace of Clades. Please welcome our guest speaker for today, AronRa.
My talk today concerns the oft-recited that dinosaurs lived with man. I get this argument from all the creationists that I talk to, most of them, of course, being the young Earth variety. And even when they're not, all right, even when they're not young Earth creationists, they still tend to believe in the Loch Ness Monster and Bigfoot and things of that sort. So, there we go. There's, you see it there? Good. All right, my first recognized encounter with creationism was on Easter Sunday, 1971. I was 11 years old. I was at my grandmother's house in a rural Arizona town, and I wanted to know how to celebrate Easter the traditional way. And my grandmother only knew one way, and that was to go to church, which I thought was a really lame way to celebrate a holiday. I rarely went to church, and but I went along with her anyway, and it was an experience. And the man behind the podium described a bit of news that sounded like an interesting scientific discovery, something that I was not expecting to hear in church. He said that they, let's see, I'll get this, here we go. He said that they had found sandaled footprints of a human walking alongside a dinosaur trackway on a riverbed in Texas. And that both sets of tracks dated to the same time. Can you guess the time? 6,000 years ago. So my 11-year-old mind imagined how there could be some isolated community of, say, iguanodons still wandering around in pre-Columbian Americas. And I, of course, took the sandals to be some, or the human footprints would, of course, have to be Native Americans. We knew that they were here for 12,000 years or so, or 6,000 years or so. So well into that time range. And there's no rule that says that absolutely all of the dinosaurs had to have been extinct after or by the KT impact 65 million years ago. There could easily have been several ones yet undiscovered that could have survived into the Eocene and maybe even the Paleocene, and it's not impossible that some final remnant of that lineage may have carried on into pre-Columbian America. So, let me see if I can get everything forwarded here. One problem that I did have was the sandaled footprint. Can you see it? Yeah. Native Americans didn't wear sandals. They wore moccasins, and moccasins rarely leave clear tracks. And I didn't have time to give this any more thought because of the next thing that the guy said, which was proving that those were Adam's footprints. And remember, my 11-year-old mind locked into, now wait a minute. I already knew enough about logic and assertions to know that you can't make a positive ID of anyone from antiquity based on their footwear. And there was no way anyone could honestly make such a claim. And I looked around the room and no one was correcting this guy. And that I found really amazing. Nobody raised their hand and say, oh, you can't say that. And so I said to my grandmother sitting next to me, kind of under my breath, I said, Grandma, he's lying. Her reaction was somewhat unexpected. no one really expects to have your grandmother slug you in the solar plexus. And I learned that it is forbidden to question the man behind the podium, no matter how wrong he obviously is. Let's see if I can get in the habit of this. There have actually been several tracks just in the Biloxi riverbed near Glen Rose, Texas, that were reported to be human trackways interlaced with dinosaur tracks. And so far, most have turned out to be dinosaur tracks. In this case, some were backfilled with mud, as is illustrated here, and is suddenly obvious on the other image. And others turned out to be what were said to be human footprints were just poorly eroded, and when they eroded further after having been exposed to rain and all, they turned out to be dinosaur tracks going the opposite direction. Not all of them can be explained so easily. Occasionally you see one like this. Is that the right one? Yeah. Okay, I think I might have missed a step or skipped a step. Okay, yeah, that did. No, hold on. Yep, I am missing the slide. How about that? Okay, well, you can see the slide that's behind him. We'll just have to do with that one. I don't know why it's missing from this layout. But there's a very different explanation for this type. Can you see what that is? There's a human footprint, a very poorly unrealistic human footprint. And overlaid on that is a dinosaur footprint. Now there's several footprints that have been presented, and usually you just get the human footprint by itself, and then occasionally you'll get it mixed with something else, like a trilobite or something like that will be embedded in the footprint. But in cases like this one, and then one that's strangely missing from here, what the description is that they were man-made, and in the slide that's absent was a very Flintstones looking foot. It's not a very realistic foot at all. And there was a description on how to create it, and the slab was excavated with no footprint in it. It was actually, when you look at the way the sediment is, the piece of rock that was extracted was actually upside down, and the footprint was carved in it kind of backwards. A little bit impossible for any kind of sedimentation that way. Let's see, this was reportedly carved by George Adams, a Glen Rose resident in the 1930s. And these were popularly presented to and by creationists until the 1970s, when Adams' nephew explained how they were made. And let's see, the reason the footprint was made by hand using hammer and chisel and a center punch to simulate raindrops, because of course you had to have a flood in there somewhere. And telltale blemishes could be dulled with muriatic acid, and the fresh marks could be artificially aged by being covered in manure for a few days. The last application has become quite a tradition among pseudoscience enthusiasts. You may notice that most of the compelling arguments for creationism are in fact buried in bullshit. Now, moving on to this slide, in the creationist tradition, if you can't find any actual evidence, you create your own. Likewise, if you can't find any authorities to support you, you create those too. And if those alleged experts can't get appropriate credentials, you can also create those. Meet Dr. Carl Baugh. He's one of the few remaining professional creationists still trying to defend the Biloxi man track. He also has the dubious dishonor of having been called out as a fraud even by other creationists. Here we see him with another man track with a dinosaur stepping on it. Like I said, was not the one I wanted to show. The one I wanted to show was hokey, as I believe. Baugh is a charlatan, someone who calls himself a doctor but doesn't actually have a legitimate PhD. He claims 3 doctorates, one of which was only an honorary degree given by an unaccredited school, which he never actually attended. Another was a school that didn't offer the degree he claimed, so he said he got it from an extension of that school located on the other side of the world. But that extension apparently never existed. Somebody went to Australia and looked for it. It isn't there. His 3rd doctorate was another honorary degree from another unaccredited school, which means it can't give degrees, honorary or otherwise, and he should have known that since he was the president of that school when he gave that degree to himself. One of Baugh's colleagues, Dr. Kent Hoban, isn't really a doctor either. His PhD came from a mail order service rather than an actual institution of education. So he calls himself doctor, and the facility where he now resides calls him inmate number 06452-017. No one knows what his roommates call him when the lights go out. He too is a fraud, and he's also one of the last of the prominent creationists who still says that a Japanese fishing trawler hauled up a plesiosaur in 1977. At the time, the discovery created quite a sensation in Japan, and American creationists ran with this for decades. However, tissue samples and the original documented observation determined that this was actually a basking shark. It's hard to picture from this drawing, but a dead basking shark decomposes preferentially so that at some point you do begin to look like a plesiosaur. Sometimes they wash up on the shore, allowing folks to document the entire decomposition into this. What you see is looking at eye sockets are actually nostrils. Now look what the Japanese fishing trawler actually caught. The head is mostly rotted away, but as you can see, the gill bar looking like a wishbone to mark where the size that the head actually was. I read an article with the amusing title of Maintaining Creationist Integrity. It was Ken Ham from AnswersInGenesis.org attempting to reason with Kent Hovind of Creation Science Evangelism Ministries, trying to explain all the ways that we know that this is a basking shark and not a plesiosaur. Both men are notorious for discarding evidence against their positions, but Answers in Genesis knew they couldn't look past the fact that the original observation described a skeleton made of cartilage rather than bone. Nobody wanted to believe that the Loch Ness Monster was real more than me. As a kid, I tried to rationalize how such a thing could still exist, and eventually I had to accept that it just wasn't feasible. Nonetheless, I was still disappointed when, in 1993, a then 93-year-old huckster gave a deathbed confession to his part in the hoax in 1934. The head and neck that you see here are about 10 inches long and mounted on a clockwork tin plate toy submarine. There's an interesting story behind this conspiracy and the 3 men involved into it, but I'm not going to go into that here. I read an article recently which said that the 2012-2013 school year, a bill pushed through by Governor Bobby Jindal to thousands of students of Louisiana will receive state voucher money transferred from funds intended for public schools to attend private religious schools instead, and some of these teach from a Christian curriculum which suggests that the Loch Ness Monster disproves evolution, that the alleged creature, which has never been demonstrated to even exist, has been tracked by submarines and is probably a plesiosaur. The curriculum also claims that a Japanese fishing boat caught a dinosaur, and plesiosaurs are not dinosaurs, but that's beside the point. The point is that an idea that is so absurd that even the leading creationist organizations no longer defend it may now be taught as fact in Louisiana schools. And if Texas enacts a voucher program, that sort of idiocy will be the fate of our students too. Now, I don't mean to imply that none of the young earth creationists have any legitimate degrees. Some of the leading ones do, and when they do, they're usually of this caliber. Each of these men is a young earth creationist actively seeking to disprove or discredit evolution. Each of them has a legitimate doctorate in biology, but they are not biologists. They're certainly not scientists. Each of these men are dentists. You may recognize Don McLeroy, former chairman of the State Board of Education, the revisionary who felt qualified to stand up to experts. This is also the man who told his 4th grade Sunday school students to keep chipping away at that objective empirical evidence. Opposite him is Dr. Job Martin, who claims to be a converted evolutionist. One of my best friends in high school now runs an evangelical Christian school, part of a megachurch in Fort Worth. And when he and I reconnected briefly in 2004, we argued about evolution, of course. He offered to introduce me to Dr. Job Martin, author of several creationist books, and lauded by many creationists the world over as an expert in evolutionism. My friend said that Dr. Martin would be able to answer all the questions that I seek, and instead of meeting Dr. Martin, I wrote a 19,000-word critique of his book, Evolution of a Creationist, in which I disproved every sentence in the second chapter. Literally every one. I posted it to Talk.Origins and explained to my friend that Joe Martin doesn't have any of the answers because he does not even understand the questions. Nestled between these two icons of ignorance, one with a book and one with a movie, we have Dr. Javier Cabrera de Darquea, shown here with the collection of native Peruvian carvings that made him famous. Cabrera believed, as Erich von Eineken did, that ancient Peruvians were capable of futuristic medical techniques, and that they had knowledge of extraterrestrial species and the technology for interstellar travel, and that they rode on domesticated dinosaurs. To prove this, he purchased hundreds of hand-carved stones and clay figurines from local villagers, some of which depicted telescopes, undiscovered planets, as yet undiscovered planets, spacecraft, and of course, dinosaurs. These he added to his existing collection of similar-looking but otherwise authentic pre-Columbian artifacts. Once the lies were mixed with a bit of truth, the significance to pseudoscience was exploited by professional creationists like Dennis Swift. And some stones depicting dinosaurs and other questionable elements were tested in German and Swiss labs and found to be decades old at most, with some made so recently that they still contained water. Impoverished villages or villagers had confessed to creating thousands of the stones over the years to suit Cabrera's demands. To show the natural erosion, they show no natural erosion, but they do show traces of sandpaper, and were given the appearance of advanced age by being covered in chicken shit. Oh, I'm sorry, that's Eric Hovind. Same thing. He's the son of the convicted fraud we saw earlier, and this is proof that one bad apple doesn't grift far from the money tree or something like that. In 1975, local farmers claiming to have created the first such depictions said they referred to comic books, which is why their dinosaurs are so inaccurate they look more like they came from the Flintstones. For example, ceratopsians did not have dorsal ridges. For another example, take a look at this Tyrannosaurus. Look at it standing straight up on its tail like kangaroos did. And we know that they couldn't have held that position because they have fused vertebrae in their tail. They would have to adopt a position more similar to chickens, which is why this doesn't look like an actual Tyrannosaurus, but does look suspiciously like this. Remember, even other creationists reject this, including cryptozoologists, the very ones who most want to believe in the persistent existence of extinct paleofauna. And even they can prove that these artifacts aren't legitimate. For example, listen to what Stephen Myers, vice president of the Discovery Institute, had to say about this one. I bought a replica of an Ica stone with a carving of a dinosaur on it from Kent Hovind's website. And I was amazed to find that this carved dinosaur had 5 fingers and 5 toes, a turtle-like shell on its back, and donut rings on its skin. I do not know of any dinosaur like this, he continues. My theory is that the real dinosaurs, the real stones, do not have men riding on dinosaurs or telescopes or planets, Neptune or Uranus carved on them. These would be the fake ones. I would like to challenge Dr. Swift to allow one of his stones with a dinosaur on it to be examined and tested by experts. First-hand observation by Neil Steed said that even though the stones he examined did have this patina, there was no patina in the grooves, and these suggest that while the stones were very old, the carvings were clearly of far more recent origin. Once again, Answers in Genesis at one point said much the same thing, and I quote, "Unfortunately, some initially plausible evidences," I love why they say evidences, "for man's contemporaneity with dinosaurs has later turned out to be mistaken." That's a clever word for dishonest. Yes, allegedly genuine pre-Inca engravings from dinosaur or of dinosaurs from Peru have since been shown to be a fraud. Creation 24 featured these with the cautionary label, "Too good to be true." In fact, it turns out that an unscrupulous Peruvian surgeon has purchased these stones from local artists and installed them in his museum, claiming them to be ancient artifacts, and the artist himself makes these stones for tourists and never claims them to be ancient. The Institute of Geological Sciences in London has since examined these stones and confirmed their modern origin. The fraud was exposed on a Nova television documentary in 2002 entitled "The Case of the Ancient Astronauts," end quote. That was in 2007. Since then, perhaps under pressure from other creationist organizations still determined to promote these as legitimate, Answers in Genesis seems to have pulled this this comment off their webpage. I was not able to find it. Now, other creationist sites argue against the evolutionist conspiracy to test only the stones that we know are fakes so that no one would know about the other ones that are really real. But these aren't the only man-made artifacts purporting to depict dinosaurs prior to paleontology. For example, in a children's book called The Great Dinosaur Mystery, creationist Paul Taylor shows this petroglyph from the Havasupai Canyon in Arizona. Whatever it is, its resemblance to a painting labeled Edmontosaurus might be convincing to children, only until they find out that the author painted this himself, deliberately and literally contorting it to match the glyph, because Edmontosaurus couldn't stand erect like kangaroos either. Their vertebrae wouldn't allow it as well, and so they had to walk more like this. But if we compare the mystery petroglyphs to others found in the Southwest, it seems it was much more likely someone trying to render a bird. I hope that's right. Here we go. And this is either a poorly rendered or badly eroded attempt at a bird, or it is really a dinosaur further aggravating an injury to an already broken tail. Likewise, this image could be absolute 100% proof that there were once giant man-eating herons as tall as telephone poles. Either that or what I think looks like a man here was really meant to be a frog, and the artist just wasn't very good. And that's probably the case for a lot of these not really dinosaur renderings too. To give us some perspective, let's look at some cave art. These are from France, of course. Some of these are estimated to be 20,000 years old, and in another location they are estimated to be more than 30,000 years old, and these are obviously horses. There's no ambiguity here, nor is there any surprise at seeing horses in France. But this one down here at the bottom, can you see it in lower left? Yeah, that's very definitely a rhino. And rhinos are not something you typically see in France, and especially not that, because those are extinct, yet there's no doubt that that's what that is. See, we got a better view of it here. And it's clear, and it's distinct, and it can't be mistaken for anything else. We know what this is supposed to be, unlike all of these other, allegedly dinosaur renderings. Here, there was a mammoth in there. And it wasn't some strange distortion of how you would imagine a mammoth to be. It was obviously intended to be a mammoth. It couldn't be anything else, but okay. And you can see this with ibex. Now these are typically, the ibex are African, and obviously the climate's a little different in France, but we also have mammoths representing a whole other different climate, and these are where they overlap. And so these people are drawing these thousands of years ago, thousands of years before this mythic flood, and they're seeing these things with their own eyes. And there we go. There we have the aurochs, the granddaddy of all Western cattle breeds. And look at this amazing detail. Now, imagine the artist behind this and wonder what it would be like for this artist to render a dinosaur if dinosaurs actually existed and he ever saw them. Okay, now we don't have to guess at these either. We don't have to squint our eyes and say maybe that, no, these are lions, and they're not just cats. They're definitely lions, without a doubt. And it's interesting that we have what appears to be an accomplished artist doing some of the work, and as you can see, some of these are not quite so good. So we appear to have an apprentice. But even the crappy artist does it well enough that we can still tell what it is. Now, you want to see cave paintings of dinosaurs? There it is. Okay, give you just some contrast. Look at this, and look at that. And if you're still having trouble, I'll help you. Remember, if you don't see it, maybe you just don't have enough faith. You got to see it. You got to fake it till you make it. And you just got to believe hard enough. But here, I'll help you out with that. So, if you really saw a giant sauropod with your own eyes, is that the way you draw it? Especially if you were able to do that the aurochs with the detail that you have. We take the highlight away. You see it now? See how distinct? How can you ask for any greater proof that dinosaurs existed than this? And I'll go a little step further. Okay, look at what you get here. Now, these are really impressive, large, and powerful animals. These are horses and cows. And look at the attention that they get. What if you saw something that was really impressive, like a Tyrannosaurus Rex, especially if it's locked in mortal combat with a woolly mammoth? What would an artist capable of this do given such a dramatic scene as a T-Rex versus a mammoth? Prepare yourself. There it is. Are you stunned? You need a little help with the fade? There's the highlight. We have a battle of hand puppets with Barney on one side and Dumbo on the other. Stay focused, because stay focused on this, going to take the highlight away. Look at that. I know you're wowed. Okay, and this is what creationists present as proof that all the expert specialists in the world are wrong and that only undereducated evangelists have it right. Here is the proof that Fred Flintstone really lived with Dino. And how could you argue with that? And that's not all. Creationists have lots of evidence of just this stunning caliber. Look at this cockatrice. This is a chicken with a dog's head and a snake's tail and bat's wings growing out of all places, its kneecaps. Let's forget the fact that it couldn't possibly fly. This is a taxonomic impossibility. It's no more real than Pegasus, Manticore, or centaurs, and obviously came from the same location. This is a chimera, a monster of the imagination. It obviously never existed in real life. Same with this Dogosaurus. The website I got this from supposed that this was supposed to be a Corythosaurus. I think that they probably meant Parasaurolophus. And amusingly, they argued that this should be considered plausible because we already have two-legged lizards. Okay, and obviously they don't understand what a dinosaur is. It doesn't matter as long as it's make-believe. That's the purpose of the whole thing. What's the excuse for this? This is a lion. It's just a lion with a ridiculously long neck, and there's nothing else to it. And I don't think this ever existed either. And everything about it says that this is a lion, yet the website I got this from argued that this was a sauropod like Brontosaurus. So how about this? This Mesopotamian lion chicken snake. Again, if you use your imagination and you don't clutter that up with education, you can make believe that this is a sauropod dinosaur too. Of course, you'll have to ignore a whole bunch of things that prove that it isn't, but that's what confirmation bias is for, right? Now, a creationist named Carl Gallups recently released a video wherein he said that woolly mammoths and round sloths were dinosaurs. And he defines dinosaur as any ancient, extinct, prehistoric animal. And that includes mammals. And of course, there is a precise definition. It's a specific subset of archosaurs. So lizards and plesiosaurs are not archosaurs. Pterosaurs are, but they're a sister group to dinosaurs. Birds actually are dinosaurs, both by definition and derivation, although creationists usually won't admit that. When young Earth creationist Lawrence Tisdale was on the Michael Corrin show, these are the things he claimed as proof that dinosaurs lived with men. He claimed that they were not fantastic creatures. He said they were consistent. And here's one of his examples. According to the description I read, this is two sides of the same vase. And notice that it has two heads. And notice that both sets of legs are the back legs, and that both of the heads are therefore mounted on tails rather than necks. But this is not fantastic, this is consistent. Consistently crazy. This is a favorite among anti-science cryptozoologists who don't know what a dinosaur is. And when I debated Pastor Bob Enyart, this was one that he threw at me. If you go to this Hindu temple in Cambodia, and you go to this one particular building, and you look at the decorative relief on this one particular column, you'll see a typical creationist desperation and distortion. Look how each of these animals depicted with a background, very ornate, similar to the repeating pattern of leaves and flower petals or whatever else these are supposed to be. And when you zoom in on this one in the middle, you'll see what creationists think is supposed to be a stegosaurus. Of course, it doesn't look like a stegosaurus, but if we imagine the background pattern as being part of its back, that still wouldn't explain why it has hooves, external ears, and the kind of wispy, dangly tail that we normally only see on ungulate mammals. If you take away the background flower petals of the image, how much like a stegosaurus does it look now? It becomes even more obvious. Now, there are those who think that this is supposed to be a rendering of a baby rhinoceros. I personally think that it's a pig. But whatever it is, this Pigosaurus doesn't look like a stegosaur. And when I debated Bob Dutko on his nationally syndicated radio show, he presented this also as proof of dinosaurs. And when I explained why it couldn't be, he said it wouldn't matter because he had so many other examples he had to prove his point. Once again, I'll just put those back. Do you see the stegosaur? Look at the tail on the Pigosaurus and how dangly it is versus the steg tail, and look how tiny the head is, and look at this pig's head again, Pigosaurus. Okay, and then moving on to the next one. I challenged Bob Dutko to present one thing that he would back his reputation on, one thing that he could give me that could be scientifically verified to actually be a pre-Columbian rendering of a dinosaur. One thing that he could verify was actually true, and that's what he came up with. A handful of Tucson artifacts, which I think should be called dinosaurs. They're a collection of cheap sword replicas made out of lead, and these were found in an already excavated hole with dirt shoved on top of them in the 1930s. You can barely see, I guess maybe you can't, there's a sauropod on that looks exactly like the brontosaurus that Fred Flintstone is riding in the beginning of their cartoon. What you can't see very clearly here are the writings in Hebrew. Now, these were purported to be artifacts from a Hebrew expedition into the Americas before the time of Columbus. I guess they were trying to support, I don't know, Mormonism or something. But the writings in Hebrew turned out to be exactly copied verbatim from 3 different Hebrew language textbooks that had already been printed at the time. And that when the what do you call it, an artist, whatever would you call this guy, this huckster, when he tried to, he was apparently trying to learn Hebrew, but whenever he tried to change the case or change the statement, he showed that he didn't understand how to speak Hebrew. And so these were exposed as a fraud a lifetime ago. And this is what Bob Dutko thought was the most compelling, and the most scientifically supported argument in favor of dinosaurs living alongside humans. Creationist arguments and evidence doesn't really get any better than that. See, this is the only thing that I saw that I thought might actually be a dinosaur. But it's only a skull and not a living mammal, or not a living animal. And not only that, but this type of skull is very common among diapsids and may as well just be a lizard. Lizards get confused with dinosaurs an awful lot. Snakes too. Here, let me show you. This is one of the earliest depictions of a dragon, and it turns out that most of the references to dragons in medieval literature, whether in history or scripture, are referring to snakes, and a particular kind of lizard that is the closest living relative to snakes. The most famous example is St. George slaying the dragon. Depictions of this beast vary wildly. Some of them give it mammalian features like external ears, as is shown here. Sometimes they have bat's wings, and sometimes they have fur. And this sort of chimera is another evolutionary impossibility. But it usually looks about like this, like a very big lizard. And you see the tongue darting out. Remember that? Can you see it? That's important. Here's a slightly more realistic relief from the 16th century. And I'll superimpose it with another realistic rendering. And here we see the darting tongue, again indicating that this is a varanid, a giant monitor lizard, a genus of several very large and dangerous species, which includes the Komodo dragon. Apparently it really is a dragon. And it's important to note that St. George was not in England when he encountered this dragon. He was in Africa. And they really do have lizards this size. Now, as a herpetologist closely familiar with these things, I've had a few of them as pets. I wouldn't suggest it, but I can tell you that these are surprisingly accurate renderings of varanids, monitor lizards. The one exception is that the tail is supposed to be forked like a snake's, and of course would only have 2 prongs. I guess it's hard to see when you first look at it, especially if you're not inclined to study such things. But when you see this motif being repeated again and again, there's obviously one artist is copying another artist's work, and it doesn't seem that anybody ever pointed out that, hey, that's supposed to be a tongue and it's only supposed to have 2 prongs, because it keeps adding prongs as we go on until it doesn't look quite so much prongs anymore. What does it look like? There you go. Guys, of course, the site that where I found these called them dinosaurs, and specifically Plateosaurus. And creationists, as I said, don't know the difference between lizards and dinosaurs. They think they're the same thing. And let's see, now let's look at this depiction. And this is interesting because this was done by somebody who had obviously never seen one of these lizards. He didn't know a great deal about them. This is why it has mammalian features. He definitely didn't know that that was supposed to be a tongue, because look at it and look at the flames all around it. This artist apparently saw previous works by other people and enhanced this into being fire. And look what this leads to. Now we have a giant monitor lizard, such as hasn't existed in 20,000 years and never on this side of the world, but look, it's also got a tongue and fire. And notice also that the name of the dragon is Serpent, also known as the Worm, W-Y-R-M. Historically, that's where they usually show up. So it turns out that a fire-breathing dragon is actually a tongue-lashing lizard, and nobody realized it because people in medieval Europe usually had no idea that tropical lizards ever got this big. So it seems that the Komodo dragon, as I said, really is a dragon, and so are all monitors, because they're the only lizards who do that tongue thing that Mushu got completely wrong. This is a Nile monitor, named for the area where it resides, and this species is the most likely candidate for the dragon slain by St. George during his trip to Africa. And remember that a good portion of the Bible comes from this area also, and that many of the monstrous animals described in the Bible match African megafauna pretty well, especially from the oldest book of the Bible, which is actually not Genesis. Genesis is a compilation of earlier works. The oldest book of the Bible is actually the book of Job, which is about 3,500 years ago. Okay, so, let's see, whether you're looking at historical references from medieval times or biblical scriptures, in either case, dragons are generally described as snakes or lizards, and are often small, sometimes venomous animals being trodden upon, and are easily killed with rocks and sticks. So knowing how this animal was exaggerated over the last 500 years or so, imagine how much more primitive authors from way back in the Bronze Age would have described a really impressive beast like this Nile crocodile. Now imagine that you're living in the Bronze Age, you're just over 5 foot tall, and you're armed with only a pointed stick and a short spear of sharpened bronze, and you are inclined or charged to take this on. The book of Job, which was written consistent with that image, describes a huge, powerful, yet graceful monster whose mouth is like a set of great doors ringed by fearsome teeth. His back has rows of shields tightly sealed together, each so close to the next that no air can pass between. They are joined fast to one another. They cling together and cannot be parted. If you lay a hand on him, you will remember the struggle and never do it again. Of course, I'm quoting from the Bible here. Any hope of subduing him is false. The mere sight of him is overpowering. When he rises up, the mighty are terrified. They retreat before his thrashing. The sword that reaches him has no effect, nor does the spear, or the dart, or the javelin. Iron he treats like straw, and bronze like rotten wood. Arrows do not make him flee. Sling stones are like chaff to him. A club seems to him a piece of straw. He laughs at the rattling of the lance. His undersides are jagged potsherds, leaving a trail in the mud like a threshing sledge. He makes the depths churn like a boiling cauldron, and stirs up the sea like a pot of ointment. Behind him he leaves a glistening wake. One would think the deep had white hair. Nothing on earth is his equal, a creature without fear. And of course, I'm quoting Job again. And this is the Leviathan, described as a scaly reptilian thing with legs dragging itself through the mud. The common use of the word now is for whale, but it apparently did not actually mean that originally. And if you take out the obvious embellishments, giving it fiery breath as well, then what you have left matches this pretty well. Creationists, desperate to turn this into a dinosaur, often admit the fiery breath thing too, and try to say that Leviathan refers to something like a Chronosaurus or Pleurodon, but that doesn't fit the description at all. Another biblical beast alleged to be a dinosaur, but which does not fit that description, is the behemoth. And creationists really want this to be a giant sauropod, but that shoe doesn't fit. Behold now the behemoth, which I made with thee. He eateth grass as an ox. And grass has never been found in the coprolites of any non-avian dinosaur, because grass didn't exist yet in the Cretaceous. Lo now, his strength is in his loins, and his force in the navel of his belly. And dinosaurs develop within a shell of an egg, and therefore don't have navels. He moveth his tail like a cedar. And this is the most contrived of all the creationist interpretations. Creationists ignore the swaying in which trees move, and instead try to imply that his tail should be the size of a tree, even though the Bible doesn't describe it that way. They also omit that the word cedar is sometimes used to describe the sprig that they would swat flies away from themselves, and of course that looks exactly like an elephant's tail, so the description is quite accurate if you get the dinosaur image back out of your head. The sinews of his stones are wrapped together, and external genitalia, especially the stones, are a typically mammalian trait and not visible on reptiles like dinosaurs. His bones are like strong pieces of brass. His bones are like bars of iron. And the elephant is the biggest, strongest animal that anyone would have ever seen in the Bronze Age. He is chief in the ways of God. Elephants are extremely intelligent, even compassionate animals, whereas the brain of a sauropod was only about the size of a walnut. Surely the mountains bring him forth food, where all the beasts of the field play. He lieth under the shady trees, in the cover of the reed and ferns. The shady trees cover him with their shadow. Can you imagine a Brachiosaurus or a Diplodocus doing this sort of thing? The willows of the brook compass him about. Behold, he drinketh up a river, and hasteth not. He trusteth that he can draw up the Jordan in his mouth. And this obviously better suits an elephant than it does any sauropod. He taketh it in with his eyes. His nose pierceth through snares. And note that it doesn't say that a horn on the nose is piercing anything. This is the nose itself. And speaking of horns, one last animal I'd like to mention from Job's bestiary is the unicorn. One modern concept of the unicorn is that it is a smallish horse. Do I have that slide? Yes, I do. Okay. With a single horn coming out of its forehead. And the origin of that multi-spiraled horn, people think it was based on the narwhal, and it might have been, but there was also a fossil of a orthocone that was reputed to have been found by Julius Caesar, and he just declared it to be the horn of a unicorn, and so that's where you get that from. Psalm 19:10 says the unicorn has one horn. Deuteronomy 33:17 implies it has two horns. Creationists argue that these ancient tribesmen we're actually hunting a triceratops, which has 3 horns, or a monoclonius, which is a ceratops, with a single horn in its nose. And I'm going to read it directly from the Creationist website that is trying to make this argument, because in fact they make my argument for me. In Job 39, 9 through 12, God asks, "Will the unicorn be willing to serve you or abide by your crib? Can you bind the unicorn with his band and in the furrow? Or will he harrow the valleys after you? Wilt you trust him because his strength is great?" This passage shows that the unicorn, whatever it was, could not be tamed or used in farming as could an ox. In this classic work, Naturalis Historia, the 1st century author Pliny the Elder described an exceedingly wild beast called the monoceros, which is 1 horn. It makes a deep lowing noise, and 1 black horn 2 cubits long projects from the middle of its forehead. He describes it as like an elephant in length, but with much shorter legs. Other classical authors like Aelian, Ulpian, and Marshall also mention a nose-horn creature called Rhinoceros. Some claim that Rhinoceros sharpens his horn on a rock and utilizes it to fight elephants, and this is the root word from which we get the name rhinoceros. And to be clear, this animal's Latin name is Diceros bicornis. This animal's Latin name is Rhinoceros unicornis. There's your unicorn. Now read all those King James Bible verses again. They'll make much more sense now. One more reason that this is important, and it relates to another cryptid dinosaur being promoted by creationist cryptozoologists. This is the only physical evidence yet presented for the Congolese sauropod alleged to be living in their rivers in deepest, darkest Africa. But as you notice, this is 3-toed footprint. Sauropods actually have 4 toes and usually have a claw on the inside. Rhinos have 3 toes. So this is not a dinosaur footprint. Don't be ridiculous. This is the footprint of a unicorn. Yes?
Do you ever, in the course of a debate with someone, get someone to say, "By George, you're right on that point"?
They will contradict each other quite often. I mean, you will have people that will say that there's never been any such thing as a beneficial mutation, and then the next guy will tell me that no creationist ever says that. We all fully accept that there's beneficial mutations. But then when you get into the specifics, then they have to start backpedaling. And again, what's really brilliant, I love to do this, is to get 2 different creationists to argue through me with each other. And I'm doing a book right now where I've got some examples of this, where people are trying to defend the prophecy of Tyre, and how Nebuchadnezzar, but what was, no, not Nebuchadnezzar, I can't remember his name. But there was, the prophecy was that he was going to come and he was going to tear down the walls and everything. He said, well, the city's still there, the island's still there. It was supposed to be reduced to a bare rock, nothing more than a place, not even a recognized location where people would spread their nets. There's a thriving city there still. So how do people come up with the justifications, rationalizations to get out of this? They often contradict each other, and I've put overlapping arguments where these people, one person claims that this doesn't exist anymore, the other one says, yes, it does, but it means this. So whatever it takes to maintain the illusion, because as I said, their entire religion is based on make-believe. Any other questions? Yes, back in the back.
Hi, my name is Steve. I've been a subscriber of yours for a while now, and I appreciate everything you've done there.
Thank you.
You mentioned earlier in the talk some things that were happening in Louisiana with regards to public exploration. I wondered, I have a 9-month-old son, so this is top of mind, this type of thing is important to me at this point. I wondered if you could talk a little bit to the folks here about things that we could potentially do in this space, whether it's writing a letter. I know you've been deeply involved in this space as well. I've seen some of your videos and talks and things. I wonder if you could give some suggestions of things we could do locally to be in some way involved in this topic.
The thing that I would tell you is that, as you well know, the state of Texas is ruled entirely by the religious right, and that we are a tiny minority, and therefore we have to be especially loud. We also have to be very specific. You can reach out to these people through several means, including petitions and demonstrations and picket signs, and also going to their Facebook posts and things of that sort. But you have to be methodical. You can't undermine the rest of us by being childish or trollish, and this is one of the things I'm really concerned about. When you have people that have direct contact, they will often blow it for the rest of us in their outrage. And sometimes it's justified. But the way that these people think, the way that they react, they have to know that there actually is accountability to be had, that we will hold them accountable, and that they're being watched, and that when they pass these ridiculous laws and say these absurd things, they have to know that there's going to be retaliation, and that these words are going to be used against them, and that our population is growing, and that we are the ones that make sense. Even if we're still in the minority, we're the ones that can justify their position. Absolutely all of the religious claims fall into two categories. Those are the things that are not evidently true, and the things that are evidently not true. And there's not a third category, which we own, which are the things we can prove actually are true. And we have to make them aware that that is our position. And that's the real case of the situation. Yes?
There was a man on the State Board of Education named Don McElroy. He's a dentist.
Yeah.
There's a documentary about him. He was showing how that all the animals could get on Noah's Ark. He had marked it out on the field. And all the animals were never together. You have your lions in Africa, your tigers in India and China, and llamas in South America. They were never together to get on any ship like that.
And he's also taking into account the number of animals that he can find in the Fort Worth Zoo, rather than the actual population that is known from paleontology, for example. I believe that at this point we have some 700 species of dinosaurs alone, to say nothing of all of the megafauna, the giant sloths, the many different species of mammoths and mastodons of various types, stegodonts. Just the elephant group comprises many different species, and if they're talking about how you don't have any kind of evolution, well, they're going to have to do a lot of backpedaling to try to figure out how you can have super hyper activated electro mega evolution in order to get all these species to come off that ark from what could actually fit on it, because we have an estimated close to 99% of all the species that have ever lived on this planet are now extinct, and it's over the course of a great deal of time. But if you want to have all these things exist at the same time and not have them all on the same boat, how does it float? Any other boat? Yes, sir.
Yeah, you meet a lot of the creationists and stuff as you're traveling around, doing your debates and stuff. Do you find that they honestly believe this stuff, or that it's kind of done with a wink and a nod to, get notoriety, get some money, get whatever? I mean, after the debate, when you guys are hanging out, if you even do that, do they come across and be like, oh, that was great, and, you had some good points?
I have been to public debates where I've seen the representative of the science position shake hands and smile to the creationist, and while that may be planned, while that may be etiquette, I'm afraid I lack that etiquette. I see the creationists falling into only two categories: those that are innocently deceived and could therefore be assisted, and those who are deliberately dishonest. And there may be some overlap in there. There may be people who believe to a degree, or I've even encountered people who don't believe the same way that I believe. I mean, that I believe things because I can verify that they're true to some degree. These other people believe as an act of will, so that they know that if they got into a time machine and went back, they're not going to see a flood, they're not going to see Adam and Eve, but that they make believe, because they often say that whether you believe something matters more than whether it is actually true. And so I'm thinking that my perspective is actually true, and they are literally pretending, and I think that is true of a lot of them. And this is demonstrated when you try to tell them something and they start sticking their fingers in their ears or do some similar action. Because in your perspective, if somebody were to present something to you, a fact, evidence that you can't deny, that actually undermines your position and would force you to change your mind, Would you cover your eyes and your ears and refuse to accept what you knew to be true in order to believe something you now suspect is not true? And that's the difference in our perspectives. They will. Yeah, somebody else, yes.
This week I was driving to work on Tuesday, I believe. This guy, 9:50 in the morning, and he gets on the line. It's an open caller thing, and he says that Pat Ray, I think he's a politician, maybe. But what I'm leading to is that he says that, well, there are holes in the evolution theory, so with creationism should also be taught as a science, curriculum. Both together should be presented, and because 95% of the Americans believe in that, so therefore it should be taught. But see, he could be, we could dismiss as being childish, ignorant. But the danger, I say, is that people like this get into the education boards, and they end up changing the curriculum, what the children learn, right?
Right.
The young minds. And but I mean, I tried to get online, but I didn't get a chance. For example, I was going to ask him, 95% of the Americans are not scientists, or biologists, or engineers. They all come in different spectrums. In other words, we are not specialized in one field to either give any credence to that statement or not. So I was going to say, well, what do you think about people like this? Because these are very dangerous people, I think,
yes,
in my opinion, because they rule the education boards, and whether they believe it or not, they will end up rubbing it on the rest of society.
Yes. Now, fortunately, reality is not determined by popular vote. There have been many things that we used to believe that we found out otherwise. And the fact that everybody once believed this doesn't change the fact that it's not true at all. What you have is major populations sometimes may be moderate, and it should be, that the major population, the most of the majority should be moderate, but they tend to be led by the radicals. And that's why you have, for example, myself, you have the more radical people, the activists, the more outspoken, right, and they're trying to attract attention from the rest. And what I try to do is play both sides, because I talk to Christians, and I plead with them to read the Bible. And I often can't get them to do it. Neither can I get them to read chick tracts. It's hard for me to find an atheist who doesn't know what a chick tract is, but you'd be surprised how few Christians do. I can't get Christians to watch the Trinity Broadcast Network. I can't get them to pay attention to what Pat Robertson says, or any other single Christian, because they'll make excuses for every last one of them, until you end up with only one true Christian, and that's the one you're talking to. Bear in mind that most of these people were in a situation where they've been proselytized, they've been indoctrinated, their education has been controlled since early age. It's really hard to beat that conditioning. My wife was raised Christian, and she told me what a dilemma it was for her to come out of this mindset that she's had for her whole life, and to allow the truth and facts to override the shadows of what has been forced into her mind her entire life. And this is true of a lot of people. And I try to be sensitive to that. You can reach these people, but it's never a fast process. I mean, it's not like, you went through your whole life and you thought that Blackbeard's real secret identity was Edwin Teach, because that's what you always told. And then somebody presents you something that says his name is something else. And you go, oh, okay, well, I was wrong. This is not something like that. This is not that easy. It's gradual steps for everybody. It was for me. Going from being raised Christian to hardline atheist was a period of decades. And that's true for a lot of people. And it just takes reason to get through all of this, and it takes repeated efforts and education for it. And I hope I've answered your question. Yes?
Take a pretty intelligent leader of our nation, say like Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. Now, can you believe that this guy really believes in religion, or is it simply a political necessity of his office?
As I said, a lot of these people, especially the people in positions of power, find that it matters more how convinced you are. Your conviction is more important than the accuracy of your position. That's why these people are incurious. They do not investigate their own perspective. They don't try to find the flaws in what they believe and improve that. They need to substantiate or bolster or reaffirm what they already believe rather than challenge or question it. And they're certainly not going to go against their societies. They're not going to go against their own culture, their church groups, their gatherings, because you know how these people are. The moment you step out and you say, oh, you know what, I don't believe that, what happens?
So they're actively avoiding thinking about it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think very often that is exactly right. Yes, sir.
You said just a moment ago that you think that the extremists sort of lead the moderates. In my mind, it's almost sort of the moderates get covered with the extremists. Almost every, not all, but the vast majority of Christians that I interact with on a regular basis aren't younger creationists. They don't believe that they think that the story is important symbolically or allegorically, but they don't think these things actually happen. I still feel, however, that they are reluctant to denounce or disagree with publicly people like William Gesher or the dozens of people they claim to talk.
And they feel perfectly happy voting for Rick Perry.
Absolutely. That we sort of, as I guess it's a movement or as individuals, need to argue for them separating themselves from that so that we can sort of team up on the extremists rather than attacking all theists as a group and separating ourselves from the moderates and extremists.
That is largely the answer. It really is to wake all these other people up to what they're being, because they're supporting right-wing young earth creationism and other forms of religious extremism through financial donations and through their votes. And that's where these extremists are getting their power from. And you need to drain that base by waking up the populace that has been forced into this kind of submission. And that's what they want it to be. They want it to be an unquestioning obedience. And if you read the mission statement of practically every religious institution that favors education, or that presents themselves as favoring education, that's what they're after. They want people that will ultimately support the people at the top. Yes?
Kind of to answer two questions. The one question was, what can you do to oppose?
Stand up, please.
What can you do to oppose these sorts of actions on the part of fundamentalists and in education? And the other one, is there any way to get moderate Christians on board against the fundamentalists? There is a group that maybe some of you have heard of, the Texas Freedom Network. If you go to their website, they have action alerts. Like, they can give you things that, if there's some kind of legislation coming up where they need you to email your legislator or something like that, they'll alert you. They even have a Facebook where they can alert you through Facebook.
Yeah, these are a handful of people who have, as a full-time employment position, they're sitting on the pulse of Texas politics in Austin, down the street from the Capitol, and they keep everything updated. So all of the interested parties like myself who want to be on their mailing list, want to attend the protests, they can get direct information from them. Yes, sir.
And it's composed of secularists mainly, but also secular Christians.
You know what, I skipped over you. I'm sorry. Well, go ahead.
I was going to say, regarding the Texas systematized stupidity, and I was going to bring up Texas Freedom Network. Please, if you're not familiar with them, go to their website, subscribe to their newsletter. And then I also had a question for you.
Yes, sir.
As you have encountered these strange people, did anybody ever explain to you whether an angel is a bird or a mammal?
All things are possible. Okay, yes, sir, back there.
My degree's in anthropology.
Oh,
and
good luck.
every culture that I've ever read about or studied about, probably one or two at least, the less technologically advanced they are, the more they tend to have some belief in supernatural of some sort as a method of dealing with or handling emotionally the things that they cannot explain. So this is a problem that has been occurring or being solved by this belief in supernatural for probably at least the last 100,000 years, more or less. So it makes the task of those of us who look to logic to answer questions and not some deity someplace, a more difficult task. And part of the problem is that there's an old saying, a man convinced against his will is of the same opinion still.
Yeah.
And trying to get somebody who has been born, bred, and indoctrinated in the belief of a supreme deity of some sort, take some of their money, destroy some of their property, it's all right, but poke a hole in their belief and they'll call down the wrath of God and all the angels and the state legislature and everything else they could vote for against you.
Yes, because it's an emotional attachment. It's not about understanding. Yes, sir.
Are you a teacher, and if not, can you get a teacher certification? As soon as possible, please.
I'm looking into that, thank you. And there's so many over here. You first, sir.
Not all of these people who profess to have advanced degrees are actually frauds. Some of them do. They had a seminar at Rice a number of years ago in which 3 of them promoted creationism through anthropology, biochemistry, astrophysics, and gave arguments that I have a degree just in medicine, and these are the arguments. You know, I knew nothing about them and had no way to contradict them, but some professors at Rice were there in these departments and did argue against them. But I think that if people like this go before the State Board of Education, they will make a convincing argument to someone who is not knowledgeable. It takes a real expert to contradict them and show their arguments. You know, they were using cellular chemistry to show that if the enzyme just did this, you know, there's 1/1,000,000th of a chance that it would produce an evolutionary change, and that's impossible. You know.
Yeah. So, yeah, I don't know how to comment on that. Yes, I mean, you have people that have real degrees, that really know their stuff. Kurt Wise, I think it's Kurt Wise, is probably the best example of that. He studied paleontology at Harvard under Stephen Jay Gould, but he took his Bible and started cutting the bits of it out that he would have to discard in order to accept evolution and what science actually understands. And he came to the conclusion that the Bible cannot hold together literally if he accepts the facts of science, which he cannot do. So again, it's a make-believe situation. He chooses that he's going to believe what he knows is not true. And I know he says that he believes that, and that if there was any evidence for it, that he would change his mind, but he's already demonstrated he will not.
As far as I know, all the polls of people show that they will choose to believe their religion rather than something that's shown to them to be fact that contradicts them.
I've had many people tell me exactly that. One person, for example, said that if she had a time machine and could go back and know for certain that there was no flood and know for certain that Jesus died and rotted away, that her faith required that she continue to believe anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And there was so many others that are good. Yeah, you was great.
Yeah,
Yes,
you're
sir.
seeing a documentary about how textbooks are selected just recently, and the fact that the Board of Education member, the Creationist, did not get reelected. And some of the arguments really basically made fun of, you know, Jesus and dinosaurs walking hand in hand. Are you encouraged overall with the direction that it's going as far as the bringing that to light?
Yeah, my daddy said that an animal is never more dangerous than when it is injured. And religion has been dealt a lethal blow. And they are lashing out. And that's why you have things like the good news clubs. And that's why you have, you know, every advantage taken of unwise rulings by the courts to their advantage, where they can undermine education even further. They're trying desperately to get a hold of the minds of children before those minds can begin to think, and to stop that process and to make them believe instead. I've got to get some of these. You in the bear pack.
Yeah, just real quick, something that a lot of people have mentioned, maybe you can touch on. Most of the people in here don't have thousands of followers on YouTube. You know, you don't have a microphone type of situation. What is something you would address as ways that people can be more active in that type of, in this particular situation?
I am encouraged by the number of activist groups that I've seen. I'm a member of the Fellowship of Free Thought back home in Dallas. You guys have the Humanists of Houston here. Everywhere that we go, we find groups of this kind. I mean, I often get emails from a group called the Atheists of Muskogee, Oklahoma, and I'm pretty sure I've met both of them. The fact that there are organizations like that popping up everywhere is very, very helpful. And they provide everything that the church used to, right? Except that we have something that's actually verifiably true. And we don't require faith, and we don't encourage faith, because faith is the most dishonest position it is possible to have, and we have become aware of that. And as we spread this information out, we are having an effect on people just by being good people and not believing the nonsense that they do. When I gave a speech accidentally to a group of primarily Christians, and they didn't know who I was. There was a small atheist group that had brought me in, but they had the college bring students in from other classes, so like extra credit thing that were being offered by their teachers. It was the least friendly speech to Christians that I had ever given, and I was giving it unknowingly to a room full of them.
Maybe you survived.
Some of the people stood up to try to challenge me, saying that, like these two black girls, for example, they told me that the Bible does not endorse slavery, and that the Bible does not oppress women. And I'm stunned. Have you read it? And then you get the usual argument. Well, where does your morality come from? And I'm like, well, where do you get yours? And how does your life have meaning? How could it? If everything that you do is known by this uber natural overlord, and he knows all the future things, well, then he already knows what you're going to do. And he already knows what he's going to do. So your prayer is useless. And the only thing that you're being judged on has nothing to do with whether you're good or bad. I mean, look at us. We're being good people. And these girls pointed out to me that I was being harsh to them because they don't judge me for whether I believe or they don't believe. She goes, I have atheist friends and I'm fine with that. And I said, why is your God not as good as you are? Because that's all he judges. There was somebody, yes.
I was wondering if you've ever considered packaging some of your arguments as supplemental material for teachers or for book clubs and discussion groups. I don't know if there's anyone out there in the world who might, be willing to advise on, some states that might be a little friendlier to letting teachers use a supplemental material that would actually promote science.
I would love to promote standardized instructional materials, because I've seen some teachers that are really just horrible. The few who understand and accept evolution and can teach it adequately are being completely overrun by those who, if they would teach evolution, don't understand it, and the vast majority don't understand it, won't teach it, and will actually lie to their students instead. And so if you had a standardized lesson, like a collection of films or something like that the students would have to have, that was promoted by a major science organization, right, and produced by professional people so the information is accurate and peer-reviewed and all of that and it's good and above board, I would love to see that displayed everywhere. And I would love to see the reaction that would come from that. Because in Texas right now, as you may or may not be aware, there's a lot of Bible study classes where they're actually bringing in creationist materials as third-party stuff to tell them that everything that you've been taught in science is wrong and you should believe in magic instead. Yes. Well, you're not you.
I had something
okay.
to
What?
say.
What?
There was a history of world religions class that used true foundational falsehoods and creationism in the course. That's the closest we've got.
Yeah, I'm not an authority enough to have those kind of accolades. I'm sorry. There was somebody else in the back. No? Okay. Go ahead.
I've heard accusations that the state of Texas, the legislature, is intentionally underfunding education.
Yes.
So that they can actually end up turning the schools into voucher schools and teach Christianity, creationism, etc. within the public schools and finance it by public monies, just like Louisiana's getting away with.
I haven't
some vague opinion that I haven't been able to verify from the Supreme Court of the United States that allows this.
Yeah, I haven't gotten verification of all of this yet, but I understand that there's a lot more to it than just that. They're not just trying to underfund, they're also trying to undermine in other ways. I mean, they have like created a system of testing wherein the school can't pass as many students as they should because of the way the testing materials are set up or the way the lessons are set up, what have you. It's everything they can do to make the secular schools look bad and make the charter schools, the religious schools, attempt to look good. What I would like to see in that case is a standardized set of tests where everybody has to meet the same criteria, because there we will see where the religious schools actually begin to fail.
One further comment about that. This is a personal experience that my daughter has had. One of the ways that you can keep more secular people from being able to get into teaching positions is to stop young people from getting into the teaching profession. Keep the old guard there. And that's what is going on since the state, since Perry has actually killed the hiring of new teachers with his policies. That teaching is one of those professions that if you don't get a job within 2 years after graduating from college with a teaching certificate, you will never work in that field. Because when they get ready to hire somebody that is inexperienced, they will always hire a brand new graduate and never hire somebody that has more than 2 years of not working in that field, because they're deemed to be out of date.
Yeah.
So they're killing a whole generation of new teachers right now, and they're being forced into other fields, and they'll never work as teachers, literally.
Yeah, and I know that situation all too well.
And that's happened to my daughter.
This is going to have to be our last comment. We've got to start.
Understood. So if you have a good question, what do you feel really strongly about? No? No? Okay, Logan. What?
What I've noticed about Noah's Ark, whenever I was reading like half of Genesis, I noticed that Noah's Ark was only 21 cubits long, or I forgot the term. Is it cubits?
Yeah. Yeah, this long.
Yeah. Which was very unstandardized. But
it depends on which of us is measuring it. So what was your question?
That's a very low amount of measurement to be. And I'd imagine that it's also on the other side, it's 7 in cubits, because it's kind of a third of 21. So I imagine that it's like it's 21 by 7.
Is there a question in there?
How many animals can that hold?
Okay, I think we'll just absorb your question now. Thank you, Logan. Thank you, everyone.